The moment my mother-in-law clinked her champagne glass and announced to the entire room that I would be presenting her with $50,000 as her 60th birthday gift, I didn't flinch. I didn't gasp. I just set down my fork very slowly and I smiled. Because I had been waiting for exactly this moment for 5 years. My name is Sylvia, and I've been married to my husband for 6 years. We met in graduate school. He was finishing his MBA. I was in my second year of accounting. He was kind, funny, a little scattered in the way that charming people sometimes are. I fell in love with him before I fully understood what I was marrying into. His mother. I'll call her what everyone calls her, because in that family, she has always been Mom. Even to me, even though the word in her mouth always felt like a demand rather than an invitation. His mother had money once. Old money. The kind that comes with a house in Connecticut that's too big to heat and portraits on the walls of people nobody remembers. By the time I entered the picture, most of it was gone. Not because of any tragedy, just because of choices. Decades of choices made by people who believed that the money would always be there, that someone would always refill the glass. That someone, it turned out, was supposed to be me. I didn't see it clearly at first. The first year, I thought the borrowing was temporary. My brother-in-law needed help with a deposit on an apartment. My mother-in-law's car needed repairs. There was a property tax bill on the Connecticut house that had been deferred one too many seasons. My husband would come to me quietly, apologetically, and I would say yes, because I loved him, and because I thought that's what families did. They helped each other. What I didn't understand yet was that in this family, help only ever flowed in one direction. By year 3, I had given them, quietly, without any formal accounting, somewhere close to $40,000, not gifts. Not really. Loans that were never written down, which meant they were never going to be repaid. I know that now. I knew it then, too. Somewhere underneath the part of me that still wanted to believe I was wrong about them. The thing that changed everything wasn't dramatic. It was a Tuesday afternoon. I was working from home, deep in a spreadsheet, and my husband had left his laptop open on the kitchen counter. A notification popped up. A text from his mother. I wasn't trying to read it. But the words were right there. She'll never say no to you. She's too afraid of losing you. Just keep asking. I sat with that for a long time. I didn't cry. I didn't confront him. I just closed his laptop very carefully and went back to my desk and stared at the spreadsheet without seeing any of it, and then I started planning. I want to be clear about something, because this matters. I am not a vindictive person by nature. I am an accountant. I think in numbers, in structures, in long-term consequences. What I built over the next 2 years was not revenge in the hot, reckless sense. It was a reckoning. Quiet, methodical, and airtight. The first thing I did was open accounts that existed only in my name. Not hidden, exactly. Just separate. I moved my direct deposit. I restructured the way our finances were organized so that the money my mother-in-law thought of as hers to access was no longer accessible. This took time. I did it carefully, in small steps, so that nothing looked sudden or suspicious. The second thing I did was hire an attorney. Not a divorce attorney. Not yet. A civil attorney, someone who specialized in financial disputes. I brought her 5 years of records. Bank statements, transfer confirmations, text messages where my husband had asked me for money on his mother's behalf. Voicemails I had saved without knowing why, just some instinct that said, keep this. What my attorney found when she dug into the Connecticut property was interesting. Years before I came into the picture, my husband's grandmother had added my husband as a co-owner of the house. Not his mother, not his brother. My husband, who was then 22 and had promptly forgotten about it because nobody in that family kept track of anything. His mother had been living there, managing it, or not managing it, as the case was, as though it were entirely hers. She had taken out a home equity line of credit against it. She'd used it to fund a lifestyle that had nothing to do with my husband, and certainly nothing to do with my husband, and certainly nothing to do with me. He co-owned a property he didn't know he co-owned, and his mother had borrowed against it without his knowledge or consent. I sat with that for a while, too. I didn't tell him. Not immediately. I knew that if I told him, he would tell her, and everything I had been building would collapse before I was ready. My husband is not a bad person. I want to be careful to say that. He is weak in the way that people are weak when they've been conditioned their entire lives to prioritize one person's comfort above everyone else's. His mother built him that way. I don't entirely blame him, but I also couldn't let that weakness destroy me. So I waited. I finished what I was building, and then his mother announced her 60th birthday party. It was going to be at the Connecticut house. Family only, she said. Though her definition of family had always been elastic, it expanded when she needed an audience and contracted when she needed a scapegoat. About 30 people were invited. My brother-in-law would be there with his girlfriend. Cousins I had met twice. An aunt who smelled like lavender and said very little. And my attorney, who I had invited as my college friend. Which was technically true. We had overlapped by one semester at the same university, which I had verified specifically because I knew this day was coming. I wore blue, a deep navy dress, simple, the kind of thing you'd wear to a work dinner. I wanted to look calm. I wanted to look like someone who had absolutely nothing to fear. The party started at 6. By 7, everyone had a glass in their hand, and the room had that particular warmth that comes from wine and old family stories that everyone has heard before. My mother-in-law was in the center of it, radiant, the way she always was when she had an audience. She has a gift for that, for making any room feel like it was assembled for her benefit. I had admired it once, now I understood it for what it was. Dinner was served at 7:30. My attorney, I'll call her by the name she introduced herself with, which was simply my college friend to everyone in that room, was seated 2 chairs down from me, which we had arranged in advance. She had a glass of sparkling water in front of her. She was very composed. She is always very composed. The speeches started after the main course. My brother-in-law went first, something warm and a little rambling about childhood memories. One of the cousins said something about legacy, and then my mother-in-law stood up, and the room went quiet in that particular way it always did for her. And she said, I want to take a moment to acknowledge my daughter-in-law, Sylvia. I looked up. Sylvia has been such a generous presence in this family, she said, and she was smiling, the way a cat smiles when it has already calculated the distance to the thing it wants. And I know she's been thinking about what to give me for this milestone birthday. Sylvia, sweetheart, I think now is the perfect time. 30 faces turned toward me. My husband put his hand over mine under the table. A signal, I realized. Not comfort, a signal. Go along with it. He had known this was coming. He had helped plan it. I looked at him. He had the grace to look slightly uncomfortable, but not enough to do anything about it. I set my napkin on the table. I stood up. I said, You're right. I have been thinking about it. She beamed. Actually, I said, there's something I want to share with everyone tonight, since we're all together. Since this seems like the right moment for honesty. Something shifted in her expression. Just slightly. A flicker. I looked at my attorney and gave a small nod. My attorney reached into the bag at her feet, a simple leather tote, nothing conspicuous, and placed a folder on the table in front of her. My mother-in-law's smile had not entirely disappeared, but it had changed shape. Sylvia, what is this? I've spent the last 2 years working with an attorney, I said. I kept my voice even, not loud, not theatrical, just clear, looking into some financial matters that have been bothering me for a while. My husband said, Sylvia, let me finish, I said quietly, and something in the way I said it made him stop. I turned back to my mother-in-law. Between 2019 and last year, I transferred a total of $41,000 to you directly, or to accounts controlled by you at my husband's request. I have documentation of every transfer. I also have the text messages in which you advised him on how to ask me for money. The room was very still. Her voice dropped. That was private. I know, I said. A lot of things in this family have been private, including the home equity line of credit you took out against the Connecticut property. The property that my husband co-owns with you. Without his knowledge. Without his consent. My brother-in-law said, Wait, what? My husband's face had gone the color of old paper. My attorney spoke then, for the first time. She identified herself, calmly and professionally, and explained that the documentation in the folder outlined the specifics of the home equity line, the amount, the timeline, the fact that a co-owner's signature was required and had not been obtained. She noted that this was something that had legal implications. My husband might want to discuss with his own counsel. My mother-in-law stood very straight. She looked at me the way she'd always looked at me. Like I was a problem she hadn't yet found the right solution for. "You are doing this at my birthday party. You announced at your birthday party," I said, "in front of 30 people that I would be giving you $50,000. I thought it was appropriate to have the conversation in the same place." "This is family," she said, and her voice had that edge it got when she was deciding whether to make someone cry or make them feel small. "You don't air family business in front of—" "In front of whom?" I asked. "These are all family. You said so yourself when you sent the invitations." One of the cousins coughed. The aunt who smelled like lavender set down her fork. My brother-in-law said, slowly, "Mom, did you actually take out a loan against the house without telling him?" She didn't answer. My husband was very quiet beside me. I could feel him processing. I had thought about this moment many times, what he would do, which direction he would fall. I had not been able to predict it with certainty, and I couldn't predict it now. That was the one variable I had never been able to fully account for. I reached into my own bag and placed a second folder on the table. This one in front of him. "These are separation documents," I said. "I'm not asking you to sign anything tonight, but I want you to understand what I know and what your options are." He looked at the folder. He didn't open it. "I also want you to understand," I continued, and I was talking to him now, not to the room, though the room was absolutely listening, "that the $41,000 I gave this family over 5 years, money I earned, money I saved, money I gave because you told me it was temporary and because I believed you. That money is part of the claim my attorney has outlined. It's documented. It's recoverable. Sylvia." His voice was very quiet. "You've been planning this for 2 years," I said. "Yes." There was a long silence. My mother-in-law sat back down. I don't think she decided to. I think her legs made the decision for her. She looked at the table rather than at me. In 6 years of knowing her, I had never seen her look at the table. My brother-in-law looked at her. He looked at my husband. He looked at the folder my attorney had brought. He said very carefully, "Mom, I think you need to tell us what's actually in that equity line." She didn't answer. But the fact that she didn't answer was its own kind of answer, and everyone in the room understood it. I looked around at the 30 people who had come to celebrate her birthday. Some of them looked uncomfortable. Some of them looked fascinated. The aunt with the lavender perfume was watching me with an expression I couldn't quite read. Not hostility, not exactly, something more like reassessment. Like she was recalibrating who I was. I picked up my napkin and put it on my chair. I picked up my bag. "I'm going to go," I said. "I didn't come here tonight to ruin anyone's evening. I came because I was told I would be expected to hand over money at this table, and I wanted everyone who was going to be at this table to know the full context." I looked at my husband one more time. He was still staring at the folder I'd placed in front of him. His hands were flat on the table, very still. "I hope you'll read it," I said. "I hope we can talk. But I need you to know that whether we do or we don't, I'm going to be fine." I've made sure of it. I walked toward the door. The house was old, and the floors creaked in that particular way. Old houses do. Each step audible. Nobody said anything. Outside, the evening air was cool and smelled like grass and something faintly like rain coming. I stood on the porch for a moment and breathed. My attorney came out 2 minutes later. She handed me my coat. We had driven separately, as arranged. "How do you feel?" she asked. I thought about it honestly. Not performing for the room anymore. Not managing my expression. Just actually checking. "Like I just put something down that I've been carrying for a very long time," I said. She nodded. She understood what that meant. "I want to tell you what happened after, because I think it matters." My husband called me that night. Not yelling. That surprised me. He was very quiet on the phone. He asked if he could come home and talk. I said yes. We talked until almost 2 in the morning, sitting at the kitchen table, and it was the most honest conversation we had ever had. He told me he had known, in some part of himself, that what was happening was wrong. He told me he had not known about the equity line. He was genuinely shaken by that. Not performing shock, actually shaken. I believed him, for what it's worth. I told him I didn't know yet what I wanted. That was also true. What I knew was this. I had spent 5 years making myself smaller to fit into a space his family had decided was appropriate for me. And in the 2 years of planning, of documenting, of quietly restructuring my entire financial life, I had remembered who I actually was. I was someone who could look at a complicated situation and find the structure underneath it. I was someone who kept records. I was someone who, when she finally decided to act, acted with precision. The separation documents are still sitting in a folder. We are in what I would describe as a very careful, very honest renegotiation of everything. Some days I think we'll find a way through. Some days I'm not sure. But here's what I know for certain. The Connecticut house has been placed in receivership while the equity line situation is sorted out. My mother-in-law has retained her own attorney. My brother-in-law, to my genuine surprise, called me the week after the party and apologized. Not for everything, not with full understanding, but genuinely. He said he'd had no idea about the transfers. He said he thought their mother had been managing her own finances. I believed him too. And the $50,000 she announced I would be giving her? She has not mentioned it again. Not once. I am not going to tell you that I feel triumphant. That's not actually what it feels like. What it feels like is that I finally stopped waiting for someone to give me permission to take my own life seriously. I stopped waiting for my husband to choose me. I stopped waiting for his mother to see me as a person rather than a resource. I stopped waiting for the situation to somehow resolve itself without me having to do anything uncomfortable. I did the uncomfortable thing. I did it quietly, and I did it carefully, and I did it carefully, and I did it with documentation. If you are in a situation where you feel like a resource rather than a person, inside a marriage, inside a family, inside any relationship, I want you to hear this. The people around you are not going to reclassify you on their own. They don't have a reason to. You are useful to them exactly as you are. The reclassification has to come from you. It took me 5 years to understand that. I wish it had taken less. But I also know that when I finally moved, I moved correctly, and there is something to be said for that. I walked out of that house in Connecticut on my own 2 feet, in my navy dress, with my attorney beside me and 30 people inside me and 30 people inside reconsidering everything they thought they knew about the quiet daughter-in-law who always said yes. And for the first time that night, at a very long time, I felt like my life was actually mine. I've thought a lot about what made that night possible. Not the lawyer, not the documents, not the 2 years of quiet preparation. Though all of that mattered, what made it possible was something that happened much earlier, in a much smaller moment. It was a Tuesday afternoon, a notification on a screen that wasn't mine, and a sentence I was never supposed to read. She'll never say no. She's too afraid of losing you. That sentence broke something in me, but it also clarified something. For 5 years, I had been telling myself a story about patience and loyalty and the kind of love that asks nothing in return. And that story was keeping me in a place where I was slowly being emptied out, financially, emotionally, in the way you stop recognizing yourself in the mirror after a while. Not because anyone hit me or screamed at me, because I had been made to feel, very gradually, very consistently, that my needs were a disruption and my money was a shared resource and my silence was the price of belonging. The thing about that kind of situation is that it doesn't announce itself. Nobody sits you down and says, "We are going to treat you like a resource now." It happens in small steps. A request here, a guilt trip there. A husband who learns, over years of conditioning, to prioritize one person's comfort above everyone else's, including yours. And you keep adjusting. You keep making yourself a little smaller, a little more agreeable, because you think that's what love requires. It doesn't. That's not love. That's erosion. What I did over those 2 years wasn't revenge in the way people mean when they say that word. Hot and reckless and satisfying in the moment, but hollow afterward. It was something closer to reconstruction. I rebuilt the financial structure of my own life. I found documentation of things that had been done without my knowledge. I hired someone whose job was to think clearly when I was too close to the situation to do so myself. I acted from a place of information rather than anger, and that made all the difference. My mother-in-law believed that my silence was permanent. She had tested it enough times to feel confident. What she didn't account for was that silence can be a choice, and choices can change. There's something I want to say about my husband, because I think it's important and it's easy to flatten him into a villain in the retelling. He is not a villain. He is a person who is shaped by a family that taught him certain things were normal, that a woman's income was a family asset, that keeping the peace was more valuable than keeping promises. That loyalty meant protecting the people who had always been there, even at the expense of the person he chose. He learned those things so early and so thoroughly that he stopped being able to see them as choices at all. That doesn't excuse what he participated in, but it explains it, and understanding it is what allowed me to walk out of that house without hatred. Just clarity. What I know now is this: intelligence without ethics is just a tool for taking. My mother-in-law is a sharp woman. She understood people, read rooms, calculated what she could extract, and from whom. But she used that intelligence entirely in service of herself, and over time it cost her the respect of the people around her, including, by the end of that birthday dinner, her own son. Resilience isn't about enduring. I used to think it was. I thought staying quiet, staying steady, not making waves, that was strength. It isn't. Resilience is about knowing when you've carried something long enough and then putting it down, correctly, with documentation. I am still figuring out what comes next. The separation papers are still in a folder. Some mornings I think we find a way through. Other mornings I'm not sure I want to. But I know that whatever I decide, I'm deciding it as myself. Not as someone's wallet, not as someone's quiet, agreeable daughter-in-law who will cover the bill again if you ask the right way. That Tuesday afternoon changed everything. Not because of what it broke, because of what it finally gave me permission to build.